I'd like to get us started by taking a quick tour around QuickBooks interface. I've learned both as a traveler and an instructor that it's helpful to know a little bit about a destination before you set off. That way you know what major landmarks to look for and what to expect as you begin to explore the details of the destination. Software is really no different than an unfamiliar city in this respect, so we're going to go ahead and launch QuickBooks. Now there are a lot of different ways to launch software. You can do a shortcut from your desktop, the quick launch bar. Any of these will do. I'm going to go ahead and give my shortcut on the desktop a double click and launch QuickBooks. Each time you launch QuickBooks, QuickBooks will need to know what company you want to open. We'll talk a lot more about the company file later. For now, I just want you to take a look at the screen and realize that it gives us some options. We can create a new company, we can open or restore an existing company, or we can open a sample file. I'm going to click the drop-down for Open a Sample File. And we have two options. One is for a service-based company, and the other is for a product-based company. Now these are kind of finite differences with the chart of accounts and inventory. Obviously, if you only provide services, then you don't track inventory. That's the main difference. I'm going to go ahead and choose the product-based company for our tour. I'll give that a click. And after just a few seconds, we're going to see a few little informational boxes. First of all, it's telling us that this is a sample file. We really shouldn't use this as our working file. We know that, but we're just using it for the tour. So I'll go ahead and say OK to this. And then I get to see the actual QuickBooks interface. Notice that this is actually a window. So I'm going to move up to the upper right corner, and I'm going to maximize that. I always like to maximize windows, give me a lot of space. You'll also see in the upper right corner that it reminds us that we're using a sample company file. They don't want you to start entering transactions that you think are in your own company file. All right, well, let's take a look and see what we have here. The very first thing we see is the home screen. And the home screen, I think, is really great, especially if you're not familiar with business processes. It's kind of like a flow chart. If you look at the left-hand side, you'll see that we have tabs for the major components dealing with a business. We have vendors, we have customers, and within each of those, we also have a kind of flow chart, if you will, of the business processes we normally go through. For example, if I make a purchase order and I order something, the next thing that would happen would be that I would receive inventory. Then I would need to enter a bill. Unfortunately, you usually have to pay for inventory. You don't just get it for free. After I enter the bill, then I'm going to come down to this next line, and I notice that I can move over and I can pay the bill. Another option would be to just enter a bill directly. Perhaps I wasn't buying any inventory, I was just using a service, like a phone bill or something like that. So if you haven't really thought through all of the processes that a business goes through, I think this is a very visual way to get a good idea about what happens. Now, any of these items is clickable. You'll notice if I move over it, it turns to the little pointer finger, and I could click to go immediately to that particular task. Another option I have is to actually move over to these tabs themselves. Let's say that I want to work with customers. By clicking on the Customer tab, I go to something called the Customer Center. Now, I also could have gotten to these by using the tab strip across the top. You can see there's Company Snapshot, Customer Centers, Vendor Centers, Employee Centers, and so forth. Well, now that we're in Customers, let's take a look at some of the details that we can see here. Instead of having generic activities, this is actually some of the details having to do specifically with my business. On the left-hand side, we can see that I'm looking at active customers. And I can see all the different customers, if they've had different jobs, and what their balance total is. If I click on any one of these customers on the right-hand side, I get to see detailed information about that customer. This is also a customizable or a filterable view. If I don't want to see active customers, maybe I just want to see customers who owe me money, I can click on the drop-down and choose Customers with Open Balances, and it will filter for that information. All of that makes it very simple to use. Remembering that there are centers for customers, vendors, and employees, your biggest components of your business, we also need to realize that sometimes we just want to do a task. If we move to the upper right-hand side, we can see that there are different buttons that allow us to quickly access different activities. For example, I want to see an invoice. Then I can just click on Invoice. It automatically brings me into a blank invoice, and I could begin filling this out, but since we're just taking an overview, I'm going to move to the left-hand side, and I'm going to look through some of the previously created invoices. I'll click once, and I get to see an invoice for the Brian Cook Kitchen remodel. Obviously, you can see things here that you would expect. There's a date, an invoice number, how it was shipped, quantity, description of items, and of course total amounts. This all makes it very easy to use and something we would all expect. I'm going to click one more time on Previous and look at a different invoice. This time we can see that we're looking at an invoice for a clinic, but this invoice looks a little bit different. If you look at the details, these aren't just items that were charged. What we're actually looking at is called a progressive invoice. For example, the very first line item is removal labor. The estimated amount was $350, but they've already been billed 80%. So when we go over to the right side of the invoice, we can see that at $35 per item and the remaining 20% balance, the amount they owe is $70. Progressive invoicing is created by first creating an estimate and then calculating as time goes by how much has been paid and how much is remaining. It's great when you work with projects over an extended period of time or in which you're going to have people make an initial down payment, payments as you go, and then one final payment. Now I'm going to move back up to my button bar and I'm going to do something that everybody knows about, which is a check. All of us have written checks. When I give this one a click, we get to see that these are actually just like checks we'd see in our checkbook. I pay to the order of somebody, it has a check number, I write in an amount. Fortunately, when we're working in QuickBooks, if we select a certain individual who's already in our system, it's going to fill in things like the address. We also can memorize different checks, so when we pay the same amount month after month, for example, that will be useful. You'll see underneath the check that we can do both expenses and items. We can mark this for online payment, and we can also mark it if we need it to be printed. In other words, I can write the check right now as if I actually wrote a paper check and I'm just entering it into the register, or I can print out hard copy checks doing a check run or a batch run at a particular time, maybe the 1st and the 15th of the month. The next button I want to show you is actually very important. It's over on the right-hand side and it's called Accounts. I'm going to give that one a click because it's really the basis of everything that QuickBooks does. Now we'll talk a lot about the chart of accounts, which is what we're looking at right now. But basically, this is a listing of every account that QuickBooks needs to use. It's also an example of a list, and QuickBooks has a lot of things that are based off of lists. We have the list for chart of accounts. We even have a terms of service list where we can tell if we want to have net 30 or net 15 or a 1% discount if they pay within 10 days. Lists become the basis of working with QuickBooks as well as the chart of accounts, and we'll take a deeper look at those in other lessons. Now there's a couple more things that we need to take a look at, and that is the overview. So far we've been looking at the details of every day. I want to invoice somebody. I want to write a check. Now I'm going to go up to the top and click on the Report Center. The Report Center is where you get to summarize all of the information that QuickBooks has to offer. For example, if I want to know what my P&L or my profit and loss is, I can click on that report. I'll go ahead and do so, and it opens up very quickly. It has a nice header on it. It gives me a date, and I can adjust the dates and things to be appropriate for what I need. And then, of course, it gives me all of the information that is part of a standard profit and loss statement. If you've never created one of these, this is great because you don't have to know how to configure it. QuickBooks does all of that work for you. And better yet, as you update your records, all of these reports update as well. So once you set up a report, you don't have to repeat it. Another thing that's helpful, especially if you're looking at the overview of your company, is this feature called a company snapshot, and this is actually new to 2009. This is what most high-level managers or business owners want to know about their business. What is my income versus my expense trends? Are there things that I need to do over in the reminders section? I can look at the bottom half of the screen and see my different account balances for savings and checking accounts, for example. I also have quick access to customers who still owe me money and vendors that need to be paid. All of these give me a very good overview, and if I want more information, I can either open a report, go to an account, open a list, or if I simply pause over some of the entries, I get a little zoom, and this is called a quick report. If I were to double click, it would open up, and in this case it would show me exactly what I need to know about Perry windows and doors. After all is done, if you want to get back to the flow chart that we looked at the beginning, you can always move to the far left-hand side and simply click on Home. After all, it's always nice to be able to go home.